Welcome everyone to the European Development Days. We are here at the D4D Hub stand. We're going to have today a media debate. I'm with Daniel Adeyemi, who is a senior writer at Tech Cabal from Nigeria, and he's also the winner of the D4D Hub, D4D Journalism Competition 2022. And with Szymon Jagiello, that was a terrible pronunciation, who is a Forbes Africa correspondent in Brussels. And today we're going to be discussing how can media contribute to raise awareness and to pose the necessary questions to make sure that digital technologies contribute to the benefit of everyone. And well, welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. Perhaps I can start posing your question, Daniel. Is that okay? So you're a Nigerian journalist covering African tech scene. A lot of reporting you do has to do with startups, funding, big tech in Africa. How do you think the population outside of this digital bubble, do you think they're interested in these topics? Do you think there is interest for stories on how digital technologies impact their lives?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. So I would say that you're right. So first of all, tech is on the rise. Tech is getting to every sector, and rightly so. When I think about the population, I think I like to divide their reaction into three. So there are those who are super excited about technology. And then there are those who are pissed off at technology because it's coming to mess things up for them, right? Change the way things are done. And then there's a tiny section of people that are, let's just say, unaware or what's the word now, or intentionally they choose to be oblivious about what's happening in tech. So I would say that for the first two, yes, there's a lot of clamor, there's a lot of demand for stories about how it affects them. For the third set, I would say maybe not demand, but there's a need, right? Because it's a two-way thing where, as the media, we also think of, oh, you might not know that you need this, but then it's important that you get to know that this is happening, right? And when I look at just a general overview of what the demand looks like, I think the first thing is a demand for stories on how the world works. I mean, tech is changing everything. You have the blockchain, you have different things, AI. There's a general need to understand how it works. Then there's also, you're talking about tools, right? So tools, solutions that help make their life easier. Right? Those are things that people are looking for, right? And lastly, I would say we probably don't consider this so much, but people are also looking for stories about people, right? Role models that they can look up to and say, hey, this person did this, or I can do it. So that's a general overview of what it's like.
Can I ask a follow question on
Yeah,
that?
sure.
So you talk about this sector, you divided it in three kinds of publics. This third public that we are not reaching, that they might not be aware of the role that technology plays in their lives. How can we reach this population? Is there room to create an interest?
Yes, I would say yes, because like I said, they might not know that they need it, but I think that a common thread that we all have as human beings is that we're looking for ways to make our lives better. People are looking for how to reduce the time they spend doing work, increase returns, and all of that. So I think by coming at it from that angle, right? Because when you think about tech, also I like to say jokingly that there was a time when paper was tech, right? Because there was a different way we used to pass across information, and even the printing press. But now we look at tech as this high-level thing. So it's kind of important to draw the parallel between what they're already doing is tech, but this will help make it better. And of course, when these people, when it comes to, a number of them are probably offline and remote areas, it's important to meet them where they are. But I think by selling or driving or making the obvious benefits appeal to them, they will most likely warm up to it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now I'll turn to you, Szymon. So you cover Africa from a distance. You are a Brussels correspondent working on you follow Africa-Europe relations, and you have also followed Europe's own debate on how to put people at the center of the digital transformation. Do you think that there's a shared vision with Africa? That would be the first part of my question. And second, do you think that the questions that we are asking ourselves here in Europe regarding, for example, data protection, big tech regulation, are these the same questions being asked in Africa?
Thank you for your questions. But first of all, let me congratulate my colleague for winning the competition.
Thank you.
This is great. So this is what I like to do, and thank you for inviting me and being here. It's a very absolute privilege. So about shared vision with Africa. Well, I would say that when you ask me these questions, it recalls me a quote by Ken Blanchard, who went on US Auto, who said that great leaders mobilize or gather people around a shared vision when they mobilize other people or partners. The fact is that when the European institution, for instance, launch, they promised to support by mobilizing 350 billion euros, if I meant no dollars, it was, in December 2021. The main criticism came from African experts saying, hey guys, so you mobilize for green transition, digital transition, you want to be part of it, but you don't consult us prior to that. So I think in these circumstances, it's difficult to talk about shared vision in here. Now about big regulations, big tech regulations, data protection. Yeah, it's getting momentum in Africa. Media are covering that. Since 2014, the EU, member states have adopted the cybersecurity and data protection convention. And since then, you have many countries, I think it's up to 33 right now, who actually enacted laws. But some of them have not yet passed the law or even enter into force. So there is a lot of maneuver for that, and I think the newspapers in the African context will going to talk about it. One concrete example I would have about cybersecurity. You had the first cybersecurity in Lomé that took place in December. What I can say from as a journalist that I had I think 30 to 35 African media, not tech specialized, but I would say from the general public, who talked about that. So it means that there is in Africa, an appetite from readers, the audience, to talk about it and to take into account this whole world, which is difficult sometimes to portray because what is happening is changing very fastly, as you mentioned. So to put it in simple messages, in simple articles, sometimes what is happening in the tech or the regulations you have or the science or innovations, it's sometimes difficult. And perhaps here lies a problem in the African context regarding the African media.
Thank you very much. And I have a question for you both, but I will pose it to you first because I think it's a nice follow-up on what you said. Yet, which are these stories regarding digital that you think that you should still be covered and are not there yet? And why?
If I'm not mistaken, and perhaps my colleague will correct me, but I think there is 40 around approximately tech-focused media across the continent as we speak. Of course, it's going to change. Like the tech is changing very fastly, so we have new blocks coming on and so forth. So I think it's widely covered. Everything is covered. What I can say in the Forbes context, what is very necessary to build role model. We have many innovators, with brilliant ideas, and it's very important to cover those kind of people having great initiatives. And from the audience at Forbes Africa, we can say it generates a lot of attraction. But to respond to your question, I think the vast majority of the issues are covered. I think the big challenge we have in the African media context is the fact that few media can monetize their reporting. So they have problem about presenting, about quality reporting in context, because covering the tech issue is very difficult. And here lies, I think, the problem is in terms of funding. This is my point of view. Of course, you have exceptions, such as Tekabal, who raised $2.3 million, or for I would say wider public steel business in Nigeria, who raised a few years ago $600,000, which enables actually to build and to recruit the correspondent to cover the issue off the ground. This is very important because it's on the ground that you actually get the information. But apart of that, I think many media struggles to have a sustainable business model.
I'm going to follow up on that for you. You work in one of the most important tech media in Africa, one of these companies that has managed to have a business model that works. But how does that impact your reporting? Because it's very difficult, and this is a big issue of journalism, right? How do you do the trade-off between things that monetize, things that sell? Because at the end of the day, you have to have a profitable business and things that serve the public interest.
Wow, that's the question that everybody's thinking about when they see you. So it's still an issue. And just to, before I get to comment on what he said, I think it's interesting that he covers Francophone Africa, right? And while Tekabal is Pan-African, I live in Lagos, and last week I was at a different conference, and something I realized is, oh, I didn't know much about what was happening in Francophone, right? And for publications that, if you say you want to be, Pan-African, it makes sense that you know what's happening in different regions. So on our own end, because telling many people, I'm like, oh, tell me what's happening so we can. So I would say that in terms of areas that are not covered, for us, we see certain regions, maybe because of the language barrier or not, haven't met enough people there, right? So those areas are not covered, because it's important that the English or Anglophone media covers both Anglophone and Francophone, and also, I guess, Francophone too, sometimes can talk about what's happening in other places, just so that we have balanced perspective. So you don't think nothing's happening there, and there's a lot of things that are happening there. And also, just being here and listening to conversations, I realized, oh, there's a lot that development agencies are doing, but I mean, like so many of them are doing stuff in Africa, and I didn't know, or we don't know, right? So those are things that it's, when you put it, they're both benefiting the public. So in as much as it's important to tell people what the corporates are doing, it's also important to let them know what other parties, NGOs, development agencies are doing. So that's how I see it. But for the business model, it's very tricky, right? And that's where we need for certain, because like I said, it's two things. Yes, there's a perspective. There's oh, I had conversations now I know that there are other things happening. But when I get back to my desk and I do 1-2 stories, I get back into like the whole, corporate startup world, right? So it's also important for this to be funded, right? So it's possible to partner with media organizations to say, oh, how can we help you such that you're able to report this, right? Maybe a series or something, but because it's as important as the stories we're telling about corporates, doing. So why don't they have the same sort of like expression? Why don't we in the same frequency? So I think that's how I see it. So there has to be some partnership where it's beyond sharing information. There is the support. That's even what corporates do, right? They sometimes, partner with media organizations and say, oh, why not like sponsor this column or something like that? Yeah. So I think that's how I see it.
In the public sector, we love free coverage. That's a reality.
I would like, if I can, to rebound
Yeah,
on
of
what
course.
just my colleague said. I will speak about Francophone Africa. I had a discussion recently with the head of Financial Africa, who is a newspaper specialized in African economics. And he had an interesting point of view about partnership coming from companies, especially African ones. The problem you have with African companies that they prefer to devote their advert budget to Western newspapers, in the vast majority. I don't know how much it is a percent. I don't want to give bad figures. But the vast majority is going to Western newspapers. So here I think lies the problem. The African companies should try start investing and trusting their own media. Because I think you have always various interesting initiatives. And as long as this paradigm will prevail, it's going to be also harder for African media to thrive and to have this American narrative made by Africans for Africans.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to cut our debate here, although it's super interesting, but just because time is limited. I had prepared a few more questions, but sadly we won't make it. But thank you very much for your time. I hope that we get to continue this conversation later in other communication channels that we offer also at the AU Differently Hub.
So if time feels so fast, it means we had an interesting discussion.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was great.
Thank you very much for
All right.
the invitation.